Protestantism represents a transformative principle deeply rooted in the teachings of Christ, aiming to restore Christianity to its original purity and simplicity. This concept emphasizes the idea of the priesthood of all believers, which broadens religious practice by encouraging literacy and education. This broadening allows individuals to read and interpret the Bible for themselves, fostering a personal relationship with faith that is not mediated by a hierarchical church structure. Protestantism's core lies in its return to the Bible as the ultimate authority, rejecting the corruptions and additions made by the medieval church. The essence of Protestantism goes beyond being a mere principle. It is a creative and renewing force with a profound impact on both individuals and society. Unlike an empire with fleets and armies, or a church with hierarchies and edicts, Protestantism operates as a principle that penetrates hearts and minds, regenerating society through its quiet yet omnipotent energy. It becomes the creator of all that is true, beautiful, and great, fostering the development of free kingdoms and pure churches. Protestantism's influence extends across the globe, claiming the whole of human affairs as its domain to fill with its spirit and rule by its law. It is a divine graft on humanity, introducing new vitalities and forces that enable the highest development of human potential and the fullest accomplishment of all grand objectives. The historical and philosophical origins of Protestantism are rooted in a divine principle rather than human progress or reason. The term itself is relatively recent, originating from the protest made by the Lutheran princes at the Diet of Spires in 1529. However, the concept is ancient, representing a heaven-born influence that renews both individual and social life. Protestantism is not merely the result of human perfectibility, but a divine intervention that allies itself with human instincts and societal laws, directing efforts towards nobler objectives. It dispels the obscurations of centuries, allowing liberty and knowledge to shine forth, and enables human society to resume its progress towards its highest goals. In essence, Protestantism revives Christianity, making it relevant and powerful in guiding humanity towards truth and righteousness. This may sound biased, deluded, and overly sentimental, but I believe that this animating principle truly stems from God's grace and is a special gift bestowed upon the peoples of Europe. Only we are capable of progressively breaking away from steep hierarchies and shame and fear-based cultures, moving towards societies grounded in law and truth. Although there was always considerable evil present, I believe that for every period we examine, we can see a net gain in religious and moral progress. This progress continued until the principle waned at the turn of the 20th century. Since then, we have been in a gradual decline, accelerating immensely in the 21st century. I propose that we strive to regain this principle, ask God to animate us with it once more, and start afresh from where things went wrong. This is a quintessential Western European mark or trait we are not allowed to lose, even for our own sake. Let's begin with the distant cause that, through numerous developments, eventually brought the necessity for a reform and reinvigoration of Christianity. The decline of the early Christian Church began in the 4th century as it increasingly intertwined with the Roman Empire's political and social structures. This period saw the Church losing its early simplicity and adopting hierarchical systems modeled after the Empire. A significant dispute during this time was about the date of Easter. The Eastern Church celebrated Easter on the 14th of Nisan, aligning with the Jewish Passover, which typically falls in March or April, while the Western Church, particularly Rome, observed it on the Sunday following the 14th of Nisan. This disagreement highlighted the growing influence of the Roman Church as bishops began to exert more authority. The Church's transformation included adopting pagan practices, such as lighting lamps at the tombs of martyrs, celebrating the Eucharist at their graves, and incorporating rituals involving white robes and chrism, that is, holy oil, in baptism. Additionally, the clergy's pursuit of titles like patriarch and metropolitan, along with seeking temporal power, diverted them from their spiritual mission. This shift marked the beginning of the Church's corruption, as it sought to align itself more with worldly power than with the original teachings of Christ. The spread of Christianity during the first 3 centuries was marked by rapid growth, largely due to the translation of the Scriptures, the zeal of preachers, and the martyrdom of believers. However, the success of Christianity also set limits to its progress. As the Church gained favor and wealth, it began to adopt the trappings of power, leading to its corruption. The clergy's increasing involvement in temporal matters and the establishment of a hierarchical structure similar to the Roman Empire's governance system eroded the Church's spiritual integrity. This period saw the Bible being hidden from the people and the clergy usurping authority over the church members, laying the foundations for the future corruption of the Church. The introduction of pagan practices into Christian worship further accelerated the Church's decline. To appeal to converts from paganism, the Church incorporated pagan rituals and festivals, diluting the purity of Christian doctrine. For instance, the Church began celebrating saints' feast days similar to pagan festivals and used consecrated lights, holy vestments, and relics in worship. The simplicity of early Christian worship was replaced by elaborate ceremonies and rituals mirroring those of the Roman state religion. This syncretism led to a gradual loss of the Church's spiritual power, as the focus shifted from genuine faith to outward forms and ceremonies. The clergy's zeal for rites and ceremonies borrowed from paganism overshadowed the true essence of Christianity, leading to a decline in moral and spiritual standards. The decline of the early Christian Church culminated in the inability to convert the northern tribes genuinely, such as the Goths, Vandals, Franks, and Lombards. These tribes, bringing their superstitions with them, were nominally integrated into the Church without the true understanding of the gospel. The Bible had been withdrawn, and the clergy focused more on rituals and relics than on preaching the truth. This period saw Christianity becoming a mongrel system, combining pagan rites, superstitions, and remnants of early Christian beliefs. The true power of the gospel was lost, and the Church became more concerned with maintaining its authority and rituals than with fostering genuine spiritual growth. This decline set the stage for the eventual need for reformation and a return to the original principles of Christianity. The development of the papacy from the times of Constantine to Hildebrand, that is, Pope Gregory VII, marks a significant evolution in the Church's history. Initially, the Church enjoyed humble beginnings, with its leaders serving as pastors over small congregations. However, by the 12th century, the Pope had ascended to a position of immense power, both spiritually and politically. This transformation was facilitated by several factors, including the decay of doctrine and manners within the Church, and the adoption of Jewish ritualism, Greek philosophy, and pagan ceremonialism. As a result, the clergy transitioned from a teaching ministry to a sacrificing priesthood, claiming superiority over the laity and positioning themselves as mediators between God and humanity. The hierarchical structure of the Church became more defined and strengthened as the Roman Empire became Christianized. Under Constantine's reign, the Church adopted an organizational model similar to that of the Empire, which further solidified its hierarchical governance. By the time of the Council of Nicaea in 325, the authority of various regional churches, including Alexandria, Antioch, and Jerusalem, was recognized alongside that of Rome. However, a significant shift occurred under Leo the Great, when the Bishop of Rome began to exercise the authority and pomp of a spiritual sovereign, bolstered by imperial recognition. This period marked the beginning of the Church of Rome's emergence as an ecclesiastical principality. The relocation of the Roman Empire's capital to Constantinople significantly impacted the power dynamics of the papacy. With the emperor residing in the new capital, the Bishop of Rome was left as a preeminent figure in the old capital, Rome. The prestige of Rome, combined with the city's historical significance, elevated the status of its bishop. This elevation was further reinforced by the prestige and influence of Rome itself, which had been the epicenter of the empire's power and glory. The Bishop of Rome capitalized on this prestige, gradually asserting more authority and influence over other bishops and Christian communities. The fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 did not diminish the papacy's power. Rather, it provided an opportunity for the Bishop of Rome to solidify his spiritual supremacy. As the Western Empire collapsed under the pressure of barbarian invasions, the Bishop of Rome remained a stable authority figure. The chaos and instability of the time allowed the Pope to claim a new basis of power, positioning himself as the successor of Peter, the Prince of the Apostles, and the Vicar of Christ. This assertion of spiritual authority was reinforced by a series of imperial edicts and forgeries, such as the donation of Constantine, which purportedly transferred imperial power and vast territories to the Pope. The conversion of Gothic nations to Christianity further expanded the papacy's influence. Leaders like Clovis, the king of the Franks, converted to Christianity and brought their people into the fold of the Roman Church. The Pope used these conversions to enhance his spiritual and temporal power. For instance, Pepin and Charlemagne, Frankish rulers, intervened on behalf of the Pope against threats such as the Lombards and the Saracens, further cementing the papacy's temporal authority. Charlemagne's campaigns and subsequent coronation by the Pope in 800 exemplified the deepening alliance between the Frankish monarchy and the papacy. The fabrication of documents, such as the donation of Constantine and the decretals of Isidore, played a crucial role in legitimizing the papacy's claim to spiritual and temporal supremacy. The donation of Constantine, purportedly written in the 4th century, granted vast territories and imperial honors to the Pope. Although this document was later proven to be a forgery, it significantly bolstered the papacy's claim during the medieval period. Similarly, the decretals of Isidore, concocted in the 9th century, were a collection of letters and decrees that asserted the pontifical supremacy had existed since the early days of the Church. These forgeries were used by successive popes to assert their authority over both bishops and kings, shaping the canon law and further entrenching the papacy's power. The process of electing the Roman pontiff evolved over time, reflecting the increasing centralization of power within the papacy. In the early Church, bishops were elected by the people. However, as the Church grew in power and influence, the process changed. Eventually, the election of the Pope came under the control of the clergy, with the emperor's consent required for validation. Over time, the cardinals assumed the more significant role, eventually taking full control of the election process. This shift in electoral power ensured the Pope's independence from both popular and imperial influence, allowing the papacy to operate as an autonomous and supreme authority within Christendom. The development of the papacy from humble beginnings to a powerful politico-ecclesiastical institution is a testament to its ability to adapt and assert its authority over time. By strategically aligning with secular powers, exploiting historical and cultural prestige, and utilizing both genuine and forged documents, the papacy established itself as a dominant force in medieval Europe. This evolution laid the groundwork for the papacy's role in shaping the religious, political, and cultural landscape of the Western world, influencing the course of history for centuries to come. The development of the papacy from Gregory VII to Boniface VIII marks the final ascent of the papal power to its peak. This period, known as the War of Investitures, was characterized by intense struggles between the papacy and secular rulers, particularly the Holy Roman Emperors. Gregory VII, also known as Hildebrand, asserted the Pope's supremacy over all spiritual and temporal authorities, claiming the right to depose emperors and absolve subjects from their allegiance to secular rulers. His bold assertions led to a protracted conflict with Emperor Henry IV, culminating in the dramatic humiliation of the emperor at Canossa in 1077, where Henry stood barefoot in the snow for 3 days, seeking absolution from the Pope. This event symbolized the triumph of the Mitra over the empire, although Gregory's ultimate victory would not be fully realized until the pontificate of Innocent III. Under Innocent III, the papacy reached the height of its power and influence. Innocent III successfully asserted the Pope's authority over both the church and secular rulers, claiming supremacy over all Christian kingdoms. He appointed bishops, summoned ecclesiastical and secular matters to his tribunal, and wielded the power of excommunication against those who defied his authority. Innocent's pontificate exemplified the concept of the papal theocracy, where the Pope was seen as the ultimate authority on earth, governing both spiritual and temporal matters. His reign marked the noon of the papacy, a period of unprecedented power and prestige for the Roman Church. The grandeur of the papacy during this era was encapsulated in the pronouncements of Innocent III and his successors. Innocent described his authority as surpassing that of kings, likening his power to the sun's dominance over the moon. He saw himself as divinely appointed to rule over nations and kingdoms, possessing both spiritual and temporal jurisdiction. This view was further articulated by Boniface VIII in his bull Unam Sanctam, which declared the necessity of all human creatures to be subject to the Roman pontiff for salvation. The papal claims extended to all aspects of life, demanding the submission of temporal authority to spiritual power, thereby asserting the Pope's supreme and universal jurisdiction. The contrast between the early and later states of the Roman Church is striking. The humble, impoverished pastors of the first century, living simply and preaching the gospel, were replaced by powerful, wealthy prelates wielding immense temporal and spiritual power. This transformation did not escape the notice of contemporary observers, such as the poet Dante, who lamented the Church's departure from its humble origins. He contrasted the early apostles' simplicity and poverty with the grandeur and corruption of the medieval papacy. This disparity highlighted the profound changes that had taken place within the Church as it evolved from a community of humble believers to a powerful politico-ecclesiastical institution. The success of the papacy over 7 centuries, from Gregory VII to Boniface VIII, was often interpreted as a sign of divine favor and legitimacy. Proponents pointed to the papacy's survival and triumph through various challenges, including barbarian invasions, Saracen threats, and internal conflicts, as evidence of its divine mission. However, this success was not without controversy. The papacy's rise to power was facilitated by a combination of political maneuvering, forged documents like the donation of Constantine and the decretals of Isidore, and alliances with secular rulers. These methods, while effective, cast a shadow over the legitimacy of the papal claims. In contrast, the Gospel's progress, marked by its transformative power and emphasis on peace, justice, and spiritual renewal, offered a starkly different model of success, one based on moral and spiritual authority rather than political and temporal power. The medieval period saw a persistent witness to the early Christian faith through individuals and communities who resisted the growing influence and corruption of the Roman Church. Ambrose of Milan stands out as a significant figure during this era. Serving as Bishop of Milan for over 2 decades until his death in 397, Ambrose's theology reflected many principles that later became foundational to Protestantism. He adhered strictly to the Bible as a rule of faith, recognized Christ alone as the cornerstone of the Church, and emphasized justification by faith rather than human merit. Ambrose upheld the belief in two sacraments, baptism and the Lord's Supper, with the latter understood symbolically rather than literally. In subsequent centuries, other notable figures continued this tradition. Rufinus of Aquileia, a prominent theologian in the 5th century, taught doctrines that significantly diverged from the later Roman Catholic Catechism, aligning more closely with early Christian and Protestant beliefs. Similarly, Laurentius of Milan in the 6th century held that sincere repentance was sufficient for forgiveness, independent of priestly absolution. This was a stark contrast to the evolving practices of the Roman Church, which increasingly emphasized the clergy's mediatory role. Additionally, bishops in northern Italy and the Grisons, a region in Switzerland, including those in the Diocese of Milan, maintained a degree of ecclesiastical independence from Rome well into the Middle Ages, reflecting the broader resistance to the centralizing tendencies of the Papacy. In the 7th and 8th centuries, the theological positions of these regional churches continued to reflect their distinctiveness. Mansuetus, Bishop of Milan, asserted that the Apostles' Creed contained the full measure of Christian faith, implicitly rejecting the numerous additions and doctrinal developments promulgated by Rome. The Ambrosian liturgy, still in use in parts of northern Italy, bears witness to the relative purity of worship in these regions. Paulinus of Aquileia, in the 8th century, emphasized symbolical rather than literal interpretations of the Eucharist and rejected intercessory mediators other than Christ, clearly distancing himself from the emerging doctrines of transubstantiation and saintly intercession promoted by Rome. The 9th century saw a remarkable figure in Claude of Turin, who became a leading opponent of Roman innovations. An ardent student of the scripture, Claude vocally opposed the growing veneration of images and other practices he viewed as idolatrous. His theological writings, including commentaries on various books of the Bible, robustly defended the primacy of scriptural authority and salvation by faith alone. Claude's rejection of transubstantiation, which was not formally articulated until the later doctrine of Paschasius Radbertus, and his condemnation of image worship, set him at odds with Rome and positioned him as a forerunner of Reformation thought. His work underscored the significant continuity of belief that resisted the doctrinal deviations of the medieval church. Claude's efforts were supported by the influential figures of his time, such as Agobardus, Bishop of Lyon, who also opposed image worship and advocated for scriptural authority. The Paris Synod of 824, convened by Emperor Louis the Pious, deliberated on these issues independently of papal directives, demonstrating the ongoing autonomy and theological independence within parts of the Western Church. The Synod's actions in many ways validated Claude's position, highlighting his significant regional resistance to Roman centralization and doctrinal impositions. The legacy of these medieval Protestant witnesses challenges the notion that the Roman Church singularly civilized the barbarian nations of Europe. Evangelization and moral shaping of these societies were the collective efforts of numerous regional churches across northern Italy, France, Spain, Germany, and Britain. These churches often succeeded in their missions to the extent that they retained the pure teachings of early Christianity. The Church of Rome frequently acted as an impediment rather than a facilitator, seeking to impose its hierarchical structure and doctrinal deviations on these independent communities. The true civilizing force was the spread of the apostolic Christian faith, which, despite Rome's attempts to dominate it, continued to nurture the spiritual and moral growth of European societies. In conclusion, the medieval period was marked by significant resistance to the growing power and doctrinal changes of the Roman Church. Figures like Ambrose of Milan, Rufinus of Aquileia, and Claude of Turin, along with numerous regional churches, maintained a theological purity that stood in stark contrast to the evolving doctrines of Rome. Their steadfast adherence to early Christian principles played a crucial role in preserving the apostolic faith, setting the stage for the eventual Reformation. This resistance highlights the complex and multifaceted nature of medieval Christianity and the ongoing struggle for doctrinal integrity within the Church. The Waldensian Valleys, nestled within the Piedmontese Alps, served as a stronghold for those who resisted the expanding influence of the Roman Church. Following the death of Claude of Turin, who had been a formidable opponent of Roman innovations, the struggle for ecclesiastical independence persisted but with less vigor. Many churches in Lombardy eventually succumbed to the papal yoke by the mid-11th century. However, a faction of believers refused to submit, choosing instead to retreat to the rugged and remote valleys of Piedmont. This resistance highlights the determination of these communities to maintain their doctrinal purity and ecclesiastical autonomy despite increasing pressure from Rome. The geographical isolation of the Waldensian Valleys provided both a refuge and a natural fortress for these Protestant believers. The valleys are renowned for their natural beauty and strategic defensive features. Approaching from the plains of Piedmont, one is greeted by a majestic panorama of the Alps, stretching from east to west, their snow-capped peaks towering above lush pastures and dense forests. The valleys themselves are characterized by their unique formations, narrow gorges, wide fertile basins, and towering rock formations such as the Castelluzzo. This formidable terrain not only offered protection but also symbolized the resilient spirit of the Waldenses, who found solace and strength in their mountainous sanctuary. The arrangement of the Waldensian Valleys is both picturesque and strategic. Each valley serves as a natural fortress, with its own entrances and exits, caves, and shelters. This design enabled the Waldenses to defend their territory effectively against numerous assaults throughout history. For example, the Valley of Angrogna, known for its long, narrow path leading to a hidden circular basin, provided an ideal location for the Waldensian Synod and their theological seminary. The combination of fertile lands for agriculture and nearly inaccessible mountains retreats ensured that the Waldenses could sustain their communities and continue their religious practices in relative safety. The spiritual and historical significance of the Waldensian Valleys cannot be overstated. These valleys were more than just a refuge. They were a symbol of the enduring faith and independence of the Waldensian Church. The Nobla Leçon, written in Provençal Occitan, a significant Waldensian document dating back to around 1100, attests to their ancient roots and doctrinal continuity predating Peter Waldo, the figure often mistakenly credited with founding the Waldensian movement. The traditions and confessions of faith preserved by the Waldenses provide compelling evidence of their apostolic heritage and serve as a testament to their role in maintaining early Christian beliefs amidst widespread corruption and doctrinal decay in the broader Church. The enduring presence of the Waldensian community in these valleys stand as a powerful reminder of their commitment to the purity of their faith and their resistance against external domination. The Waldenses, under their synod and theological college, were a beacon of early Protestant theology long before the Reformation. Their teachings, though not as fully developed as those of the 16th century, were grounded in the Bible and centered on the atoning death and justifying righteousness of Christ. The Nobla Leçon outlines key doctrines such as the Trinity, the fall of man, the need for divine grace, and the necessity of holiness. These beliefs were upheld with an evangelical virtue that distinguished the Waldenses as pious and blameless, so much so that an unusually virtuous individual was often suspected of being a Waldensian, a term synonymous with righteousness and adherence to the apostolic faith. The theological tenets of the Waldenses attracted significant opposition from the Roman Church, which accused them of numerous heresies. These included the denial of the papal authority since the days of Pope Sylvester I, who served from 1314 to 335 and was contemporaneous with Emperor Constantine the Great. Sylvester's papacy marked the beginning of the Church's increasing association with state power and the institutionalization of its authority. The Waldenses also rejected purgatory, relics, pilgrimages, and the sacrament's efficacy as taught by Rome. They were critical of the clergy's moral corruption, considering the Pope's pardons deceitful and holy water no more effective than the ordinary water. These heresies indicate that the Waldenses adhered to a form of Christianity that was closer to the primitive church, challenging the established doctrines of the Roman Church. The Waldenses were also significant for their possession and dissemination of the New Testament in vernacular Provençal Occitan language. This translation, which dates back to the 12th century, was pivotal in making the scriptures accessible to the common people, unlike the Latin Vulgate, which was largely reserved for the clergy and scholars. This Provençal version was probably commissioned by Peter Waldo and was used extensively among the Waldenses. It facilitated a wider spread of their doctrines as it was portable and more affordable than the lavish Latin manuscripts, allowing the Waldenses to propagate their beliefs more effectively throughout Europe. The ecclesiastical structure of the Waldensian Church mirrored the simplicity of the early Christian Church. Each parish was led by a pastor who was responsible for preaching, administering the sacraments, visiting the sick, and catechizing the young alongside a consistory of laymen. The annual synod, comprising pastors and lay members, convened in the secluded valley of Angrogna to deliberate on church affairs. These gatherings reflected a participatory and comprehensive approach to church governance, emphasizing joint leadership and accountability. The theological training provided by the Waldensian school equipped their youth with a deep knowledge of the scriptures, which they memorized and transcribed to distribute during their missionary endeavors. The Waldenses were not content to keep their faith confined to their valleys. They were zealous missionaries. They traveled extensively across Europe, often disguised as merchants or peddlers, to spread the gospel. Carrying portions of the New Testament hidden among their wares, they distributed these scriptures freely, sowing the seeds of Reformation in Spain, France, Germany, Bohemia, Poland, and even Rome itself. Their missionary work laid a foundation for future Protestant movements by challenging the prevailing religious orthodoxy and promoting a return to the scriptures. Despite facing severe persecution and martyrdom, their unwavering commitment to evangelism and scripture distribution significantly contributed to the religious transformation that would later culminate in the Reformation. The Paulicians, often considered the Protestant precursors of the Eastern Church, emerged around 653 under the leadership of Constantine of Samosata. Constantine, after receiving a New Testament from a returning deacon, began to study it earnestly, which led him to reject the prevalent errors of the Greek Church. His followers, who became known as Paulicians due to their emphasis on the teachings of Paul, formed the movement that opposed the dominant religious practices. Despite severe persecution, including Constantine's execution by stoning, the Paulicians persisted, guided by leaders like Simeon and Sergius. Their doctrinal adherence to the scriptures and opposition to icon worship distinguished them significantly from the established church. Paulicians' resilience in the face of persecution is notable. Leaders like Simeon, who succeeded Constantine, and Sergius, a later missionary, continued to spread their beliefs despite facing martyrdom. Sergius, in particular, spent 34 years traveling and preaching, which greatly expanded the movement. The Paulicians' opposition to the worship of images, a widespread practice in the Greek Church, further intensified the persecution against them. This hostility culminated under Empress Theodora, who purportedly ordered the extermination of 100,000 Paulicians, primarily for their iconoclastic views. Faced with relentless persecution, the Paulicians eventually took up arms, leading to a prolonged conflict with the Byzantine Empire. Establishing a stronghold between Sivas in modern-day Turkey and Trebizond on the Black Sea coast of the same country, They fought against imperial forces for 35 years. Initially, they achieved several victories, even forming alliances with the Saracens. However, this resistance devolved into acts of revenge and widespread devastation. The conflict, originally rooted in a struggle for religious freedom, escalated into a destructive civil war. Eventually, the imperial forces regained the upper hand, confining the Paulicians to their mountain strongholds, where they maintained a degree of independence for about a century. The Byzantine authorities' solution to the Paulician issue involved relocating them to Thrace, beginning in the mid-8th century and continuing through subsequent centuries. This relocation aimed to weaken the Paulician stronghold while also utilizing their military skills to guard the empire's European borders. Their presence in Europe significantly influenced religious dynamics, particularly in regions already discontent with Roman authority. The Paulicians' integration into Europe saw them merging with other dissenting groups, including the Waldenses, thereby strengthening the broader movement against the Roman Church. As the Paulicians settled across Europe, they contributed to the burgeoning dissent against the Roman Church. Their teachings resonated with other reformist groups, leading to a significant spread of their doctrines in places like Italy, France, and Germany. This period saw increasing resistance against the Roman Church's excesses and doctrinal deviations. The influence of the Paulicians is evident in the growing numbers of those labeled as heretics by the Church. Their emphasis on scriptural authority and rejection of clerical corruption provided a foundation for a later widespread movements seeking church reform. In the 12th and 13th centuries, a major upheaval against the Roman Catholic Church began to take shape in southern France, particularly among the Albigenses and Waldenses. This movement was fueled by the dissemination of the Bible in the vernacular, thanks to figures like Peter Waldo. The Romance version of the New Testament allowed common people to access the scriptures directly, leading to a reawakening of biblical Christianity. This access challenged the established church's teachings and authority, fostering a significant reform movement. The collective memory of early Christian teachings and the desire for religious purity drove many to embrace these reformist ideas. In response, the Roman Catholic Church, particularly under Pope Innocent III, launched severe persecutions to quell these movements. Innocent III recognized the threat posed by these reformist ideas and initiated crusades against the Albigenses and Waldenses, accompanied by the establishment of the Inquisition. These brutal measures aimed to eradicate heresy through widespread violence and terror. Despite the immediate devastation, including the massacre of hundreds of thousands, these factions failed to extinguish the reformist spirit. Instead, they laid the groundwork for future resistance, highlighting the enduring power of the scriptures and the growing desire for genuine religious reform. The torch of persecution against the Albigenses was kindled at the beginning of the 13th century, with the Roman Church as its primary instigator. This era marked the resurgence of religious persecution not as a state-driven initiative, but as a direct action by the Church. The Church claimed exclusive authority over conscience and faith, prescribing beliefs for every human being and pursuing with relentless fervor any form of worship that deviated from its own. This ideological foundation led to centuries of fulminating edicts and blazing pyres aimed at exterminating heresy. The Church's policy of persecuting heretics was starkly exemplified in the Crusades against the Albigenses, a movement that foreshadowed the brutal religious conflicts that would dominate European history for centuries. The territory of the Albigenses, located in what is now southern France, was a vast and prosperous region known as Narbonne-Gaule. This area stretched from the Dauphiné's Alps to the Pyrenees, encompassing modern-day provinces such as Dauphine, Provence, and Languedoc. It was a land of fertile fields, rich vineyards, and flourishing commerce, with a population engaged in art and poetry, and known for its troubadours. This region was not only economically vibrant,
but also spiritually active, with a significant portion of its population adhering to a form of Christianity that was developing independently of the Roman Catholic Church. Influences such as the early translation of the New Testament into Provençal language had fostered a revival of pure Christianity, creating a community that was increasingly at odds with the doctrines of Rome. Pope Innocent III recognized the threat posed by the Albigenses and other similar communities throughout Europe. His keen perception of the potential danger these groups represented to the Papacy's authority led him to implement a policy of ruthless extermination. He issued an edict in 1209 commanding the extermination of all heretics, thus setting the stage for one of the most horrific crusades in history. The Council of Toulouse in 1119 and subsequent councils had already laid the groundwork with decrees excommunicating and condemning heretics, but Innocent III's edict was a call to arms. The result was a brutal campaign aimed at obliterating the Albigenses, culminating in the Albigensian Crusade, a military campaign that would devastate the region and leave a lasting scar on its history. The crusade against the Albigenses was spearheaded by the monks of Citeaux and Saint-Dominique, who traveled through France and neighboring kingdoms, preaching the crusade and setting the stage for the violence to come. Their fiery rhetoric and promises of eternal salvation for those who joined the crusade ignited the fanaticism of the masses. By 1209, large armies were assembled, including one led by Simon de Montfort, a nobleman with a reputation for cruelty gained in the Holy Land Crusades. These crusaders, numbering between 50,000 and 500,000, according to various estimates, descended upon the territories of Raymond VI, Count of Toulouse, and other local leaders, bringing with them a wave of destruction that would forever change the landscape of southern France. The first major target of the crusade was the city of Béziers. Despite attempts at resistance, the city fell quickly to the crusaders. The papal legate, Arnold, ordered the indiscriminate slaughter of all inhabitants, famously instructing his troops to kill all, the Lord will know his own. This massacre resulted in the deaths of tens of thousands, with estimates ranging from 15,000 to 60,000. The city was razed to the ground, leaving a desolate ruin where a thriving community once stood. This act of brutality sent a clear message to other towns and villages in the region, instilling fear and prompting many to flee or surrender without resistance. The destruction continued as the Crusaders advanced to Carcassonne. Despite a valiant defense led by Raymond Roger, Viscount of Béziers, the city eventually fell due to the treachery of the papal legate, who deceived Raymond Roger into surrendering. The defenders and inhabitants, realizing the hopelessness of their situation, attempted a desperate escape through a secret passage. However, many were captured, and those who remained were subjected to the same ruthless treatment as the people of Béziers. The captured knights and townspeople were either burned alive or executed in other brutal ways, marking yet another dark chapter in the Albigensian Crusade. This campaign of terror and extermination effectively eradicated the Albigensian movement, leaving a legacy of devastation and bloodshed that underscored the Church's ruthless determination to maintain its doctrinal supremacy. The Council of Toulouse in 1229 marked a significant turning point in the efforts to eliminate heresy in the Albigensian territory, leading to the formal organization of the Inquisition. This council, convened under the papal legate, the Cardinal of St. Angelo, sought to root out any remaining seeds of heresy with a systematic approach. It established councils of inquisitors in every city, consisting of one priest and 3 laymen, whose duty was to search for heretics in towns, houses, and even remote areas like woods and fields. Once heretics were found, they were swiftly denounced and handed over to authorities, leading to their inevitable execution. The council also decreed the destruction of heretics' houses and the confiscation of their lands, holding lords accountable for the orthodoxy of their estates. Additionally, it condemned the reading of the Bible in the vernacular, reflecting its intent to suppress any source of heretical ideas. The formal establishment of the Inquisition by Pope Gregory IX in 1233 further intensified the efforts to extinguish heresy. This bull appointed the Dominicans as the primary agents of the Inquisition, empowering them to form tribunals of the faith in various cities. These tribunals, under the enthusiastic support of Saint Louis of France, that is, Louis IX, who reigned from 1226 to 1270 and was later canonized for his devout faith, expanded rapidly throughout the kingdom. The Bishop of Tournai provided a detailed instruction to the inquisitors, which outlined the errors of the heretics and reaffirmed the scriptural foundation of their faith. Despite the efforts to root out these heretical beliefs, the Inquisition's relentless persecution only served to solidify the resolve of those who adhered to these principles, which closely mirrored the doctrines that would later underpin the Reformation in the 16th century. The transition from Crusades to the Inquisition did not diminish the brutality, but instead introduced a more consistent, systematic form of persecution. The Inquisition operated with terrifying efficiency, extending its reach across Europe and employing methods of torture and execution that instilled fear and submission. Unlike the Crusades, which had intermittent periods of activity, the Inquisition maintained a constant presence, ensuring that heresy was relentlessly pursued and eradicated. This continuity of persecution created an atmosphere of perpetual dread, as the threat of being accused and tortured by the Inquisition loomed over the population for centuries. The atrocities committed during this period were unequivocally deliberated actions of the Roman Church, which meticulously planned and executed these campaigns of terror. The Church's endorsement of these measures was not only a testament to its commitment to preserving its doctrinal purity, but also a demonstration of its authority to dictate belief and suppress dissent. These actions were later ratified by the Church in the Syllabus of 1864 and reinforced by the Decree of Infallibility, which retroactively justified the violence as divinely sanctioned. This historical context underscores the Church's enduring stance on its right to use coercion in matters of faith, a stance that has profoundly influenced its interactions with dissenting movements throughout history. In the midst of the religious and social turbulence of the 11th and 12th centuries, several reformers and movements emerged, challenging the doctrines and practices of the Roman Church long before the Protestant Reformation officially began in the 16th century. These early voices of dissent, often persecuted and martyred, laid the groundwork for the later, more widespread Reformation. Among these precursors to Protestantism were Berengarius of Tours, the Martyrs of Orleans, Peter de Bruy and the Petrobrusians, and Arnold of Brescia. Berengarius of Tours was one of the first prominent figures to publicly oppose the doctrine of transubstantiation, a dogma solidified by the monk Paschasius Radbertus in the 9th century. Berengarius argued against the literal interpretation of the Eucharist, positing that the bread and wine were symbolic rather than the actual body and blood of Christ. His teachings sparked widespread controversy, leading to numerous councils convened to condemn his views. Despite his eloquence and the initial spread of his ideas across France, Germany, and Italy, Berengarius recanted under pressure but continued to secretly disseminate his beliefs until his death in 1088. Following Berengarius, the Martyrs of Orleans emerged in the early 11th century. Two canons, Stephen and Lezois, secretly held to a faith closer to the early Christian Church. Betrayed by a pretended disciple, they were brought before a council presided over by King Robert of France. Despite their staunch defense of their beliefs, which included rejecting the veneration of saints and the literal interpretation of the Eucharist, they were condemned as heretics. Along with a group of their followers, they were brutally executed by burning in 1022, marking some of the earliest instances of religious martyrdom in medieval France. In the 12th century, Peter de Bruy and his followers, the Petrobrusians, continued the legacy of dissent. Peter de Bruy preached across Dauphine, Provence, and Languedoc, advocating for a return to the simpler apostolic faith. He condemned infant baptism, the veneration of crosses, and the efficacy of prayers for the dead, aligning closely with later Protestant views. His powerful sermons and dedicated followers attracted significant opposition, and after 2 decades of preaching, he was captured and burned at the stake in 1126 near Toulouse. Henry, an Italian reformer, succeeded Peter de Bruy. Known for his sanctity and commanding eloquence, Henry traversed southern France, drawing large crowds and causing significant disruptions in church practices. His teachings led to widespread abandonment of the traditional rituals and pilgrimages. The Church, alarmed by his influence, sent Saint Bernard to counteract his teachings. Eventually, Henry was captured, tried, and imprisoned, his fate thereafter remaining unknown, though his influence persisted. Among the most influential early reformers was Arnold of Brescia, who called for a comprehensive reform of both church and state. Arnold, a disciple of Abelard, denounced the Church's immense wealth and political power, advocating for the separation of spiritual and temporal authority. His teachings gained substantial support, especially in Rome, where he became a prominent figure. Despite his popularity, he was condemned by the Church and exiled. Arnold continued his reformist activities in Zurich, but eventually returned to Rome, where he was captured, executed, and his ashes scattered in the Tiber to prevent veneration. Arnold's movement, though temporarily suppressed, sowed seeds that would later flourish during the Reformation. His call for the separation of church and state was echoed by later reformers such as Wycliffe, Savonarola, and the 16th century Protestant leaders. The eventual end of the Papal State's temporal power in 1870, when Italian forces entered Rome, marked the fulfillment of Arnold's vision, separating the papacy's religious and political roles. These early reformers faced immense persecution, but their enduring influence is evident in the later success of the Protestant Reformation. Their steadfast commitment to challenging the corruptions and doctrinal errors of the Church laid a crucial foundation for the transformative changes that would sweep across Europe in the centuries to follow. Through their courage and conviction, they became the forerunners of a movement that would ultimately reshape the Christian world.